Hello there. Thank you for joining us for another riveting episode of Behind Breaking Bond. We're doing something different today. The person that's usually right here to my left, Andy Kahn, he's not here. Where did he go, Sydney?
He went to Oregon.
Oregon, yeah.
Sending me pictures of snow.
Yes. Didn't that sound nice?
Mm-hmm.
Joining me is Sydney Zeiker. Introduce yourself.
Sydney Zeiker, director of the Safe Community Institute at Crime Stoppers. Semi-regular guest.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that we're going to talk about today instead of the bond issue is what we're seeing lately with so much juvenile crime, juvenile shootings. You made a remark earlier about Market Street. What surprised you about that?
Well, so I'm talking about the case where the juveniles shot and killed a security guard at the farmer's market, and it was heartbreaking to me that the suspect in that case was 14 years old. And then you brought up another case where the shooter was 13.
Yes.
And I feel like kind of the suspects in cases were 16, 17, if they were juveniles, teens, whatever, and it's getting younger and younger, and that's scary and heartbreaking.
And I wonder what's behind that. What do you kind of, do you have any thoughts on what it could be?
About it? I think there's a lot of contributing factors. I think that we may be seeing some residual effects of rises in crime through COVID, and kind of, there was a lot why breaking bond is a thing, a lot of catch and release, and kind of showing that there was no punishment, no long-term punishment for crimes.
And I saw a report the other day talking about how a lot of young people, they really kind of suffered mentally through COVID. They had
mentally, socially, we kind of, all of us were affected by it. But when you have a developing brain, a human brain doesn't stop developing until you're roughly 25, and you're supposed to be meeting all of these social and developmental kind of milestones, and that's completely interrupted. We're seeing all kinds of long-term effects of that, and I suspect that crime is one of them. You may have seen increase in victimization in the homes because, it's well documented, well researched that people who are victimized themselves they go on to harm someone else. In COVID, when we're all locked down, there's a lot of increased opportunity for family violence, for sexual assault of any kind.
And just dealing with it, because I can't even really imagine being a teenager and going through a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Because as an adult, it's different. But when you're that young, you might start thinking, well, is this something that's going to keep happening? Are we all going to die?
It feels like the end of the world.
Yeah.
Simply because all of your executive functions in your brain and your ability to reason through, to think through big picture, long term, how this is really kind of affecting all of us is not fully developed there. It's not there. You don't have those abilities the same way that an adult does. Yeah, it was terrible for you and me, but we could see likely all is going to be okay.
Yeah, we're going to get through the tunnel, and
But imagine you're supposed to be experiencing all the normal high school things, social things, games, sporting events, graduations, and they just don't happen, and the negative effects on that, not to mention kind of the push that all of these juveniles got to spend much more increased time online. We saw a 93% increase in online victimization.
And then you bring that into the picture, you've got to wonder what role social media plays on it. Is it because you see kids on social Instagram with guns, and it's almost like, look at me, I've got a gun, I'm cool.
Mm-hmm. So the Surgeon General kind of made a plea this week for making social media a warning, basically a warning label on social media, because we've seen such a strong correlation of mental health struggles with the rise of social media. And whether a juvenile is feeling mentally ill or kind of their exposure to dangerous things, weapons, drugs, whatever.
You can feel inferior too, I think.
Yes, kind of all is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. And just talking about the teen violence, we're talking about just this past weekend, a couple of days, on Sunday, a 13-year-old was shot and killed. His 16-year-old brother was shot and wounded. That happened on 911 Lakes at 610 Drive. Again, a 13-year-old. Apparently, it is believed the juvenile male and his brother had arranged a meeting with unknown suspects who arrived in an older silver sedan. The suspects are believed to be in their mid-20s, but here you have people, two guys in their mid-20s, shooting a 13-year-old to death and wounding a 16-year-old.
And, you know, what are the life circumstances there? Why are we finding ourselves here? And why are we finding ourselves here? Not one case in the year where that's horrific, and all cases are horrific, but case after, I mean, you have a whole list of them.
Yeah, and in this situation, I mean, we don't know why they arranged this meeting.
Right, I mean.
But apparently they're meeting with people of ill will, right? I mean, they're
much
coming,
older.
right, coming with a gun. You've got another situation where a 12-year-old girl was killed and left in a creek. She was found Monday morning in the 400 block of West Rankin. Now, her boyfriend, the boyfriend of the 12-year-old, said she was talking with two adults before she was killed. It appears that he last talked to her at a convenience store around midnight. Heard her talking to two grown-ups, and apparently she may have slipped out, kind of, you know,
and
from home.
I think that juveniles are so malleable, and there's so much, unfortunately, opportunity for grooming and convincing them, psychologically manipulating them, and making them believe that, you know, you have different intentions as an adult, or an adult has different intentions than what they really do. We really touch on that when we educate on human trafficking in particular, because there's this big stigma that, like, oh, people are snatched or captured, and it's like the movie Taken, where what we're really seeing, especially with young people, is a prolonged grooming process where that person willingly goes to meet with someone at a convenience store or at a park, and then
someone 12 years old, you're at that age, you're not really capable mentally of making a decision like that you're going to go somewhere and maybe meet somebody that you've never seen in person. Maybe you've talked to them on social media. I mean, that's a dangerous scenario for an adult.
But, you know, we've gone from this point where, you know, stranger danger was kind of the phrase that we all learned to, okay, well, now we engage with people in an online space, and that's kind of normal. You might play games with them, to, like, now we're encouraging you. I mean, the whole point of TikTok, of Instagram, is to view content that's made by someone else and engage with it.
Yeah, social media is basically, you're really talking to strangers, right? You're talking to people that you've never physically seen, so you don't even really know, well, you know, are you a teenager like me, or are you 40 years old? I mean, they don't even know that.
And there's so much opportunity for manipulation of content. I mean, I could pretend or pose to be anyone that I wanted. And so young people are really believing that they know these people, that they've befriended these people, that, you know, there's some reason that they should be meeting up with someone at a convenience store. And
I think we all know too that when you're young, teens, even early 20s, you're infallible. You're invincible. Nothing is going to happen to me.
Of course.
And that's just sort of the idea that constantly goes through your head. There was one more recent one where this is two teenagers who holed up a man and shot him. The man survived. One of the two teenagers were arrested. One's 13 and had a gun in the backpack.
You know, that reminds me of some data that we've been looking into about prohibited weapons on school campuses, and we had been tracking the adults charged with unlawful carry of weapons on a school campus, but most recently we've come into some data about juveniles. And since 2022, there have been 176 juveniles charged with possession of prohibited weapon or unlawful carry in a school zone. Kids charged with having a weapon on a school campus.
And the thing you always have to keep in mind too is that's what we know of. Those are the ones that got caught and got arrested and charged. You know, there are other kids that took guns on campus and they didn't get caught.
That's 176 opportunities for a horrific tragedy to happen. And, that's really why Crime Stoppers does what we do. We've removed 283 weapons from school campuses since our inception before they could be used to harm a child. But this is telling me that number is, not even as many weapons as are circulating right now, likely.
Right. Yeah, that's a scary number. And then you got to wonder too, what is prompting a kid to do that? Are they doing it out of, I'm afraid, I think somebody's going to hurt me, or are they doing it with the intention of, I'm mad at so-and-so and I'm going to get them now?
I think there's a lot of reasons that it could be. I think even we have to look at the access that juveniles have to weapons. Where are they getting them? How are they bringing them to school? And if it really is because they're so afraid to get from their home to their school, that's really concerning to me.
Yeah.
That kind of shows the state of our communities and
Right.
the state of our city.
Yeah, that's a whole other dilemma when you look at that. When if a kid feels like, well, I have to be armed to go from my house 4 blocks to get to the school, that's an issue of, well, we need to do something about the crime in that particular area.
Mm-hmm. I think I continue to get reports that people don't want to report crimes anymore because they're tired of nothing coming of those reports that are being made, and that skews numbers as well.
Right. Well, you look at what the Houston Police Department recently went through, the 200,000 plus never looked at reports, and that it's disenchanting to people. Why should I call if they're not going to do anything? And I think another issue too is we obviously need more police. The response time's not all that good. And if you're sitting and waiting for an officer to come, then your attitude is going to be, why am I calling? I'm not getting anything through the call.
Well, and again, if we're going back to juveniles, they're not even as willing as we are as adults to call again and again and advocate again and again. So if they've called one time before because they felt unsafe or were even harmed from home to school or wherever in their community and no one came for help, then it is plausible to me that they're thinking, I've got to take it into my own hands.
Right. It's one of these problems, the whole teens with guns, teen violence. It's a community thing, right? It's like everybody has to play a part in trying to fix this.
Yeah, we do. We've worked with several parent groups actually that have created kind of like Parent Watch, where they have parents all the way along the way and through the neighborhood close to the school, because they were getting reports that the students on their campus were feeling threatened in the neighborhood and have had weapons on their campuses. And so that's just a big testament of the importance of not only caring for yourself and your family, but the others in your community. And I think sometimes we lose that because we are so concerned with just keeping our little nuclear family safe.
And sometimes too, I think that there's for some parents, it's almost a different mentality where when I was in school, if we got in trouble, we would not go home and say, hey, I got in trouble at school, because we'd get in trouble again.
You're right.
And I think now you have a lot of parents that their immediate reaction is, no, my little Johnny could never do that. And the school.
Not my kid.
Right. Yeah.
We call it not my kid syndrome. And I know it's hard to think that your precious little baby that maybe is a teen now did something wrong, but I do think that we have to confront what's going on collectively in our community, and it's not looking great to me.
But what are these numbers showing? Increase, do you think?
Yeah, these are showing an increase. So in 2022, there were 64 cases of juveniles charged with possession of prohibited weapon on a school campus. In 2023, 82, and then through March 15th of 2024, there were 30. So we're already on pace to outpace last year and the year prior, and those numbers growing. It's not.
There are services for teens that if you feel like you need to talk to someone or you're troubled about something.
And I think collectively as a county, there have been many initiatives that have occurred over the past decade that really are trying to keep students from kind of a life of crime and kind of interrupt that and divert them, because none of us want kids to go to prison,
Right.
but we also don't want them to kill people.
They're formative years.
Yes.
You know, I've said this probably 100 times, but the average person, if you've made it to 30, 32, excuse me, and you've never been to jail or prison, the likelihood that you're going to later in your life is pretty small.
So historically, that's been the case. The phrase is that you age out of crime.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that in Texas, we're seeing quite an influx of first-time offenders over the age of 50 for the first time, really ever.
Really? Why do you think that is?
Again, state of community, maybe.
Yeah.
Similarly to juveniles.
Now, it seems like when you see something in the news where it's an older person, it's usually a crime for money. It's, well, somebody was desperate. It's like the church bookkeeper that, stole $100,000. You're right.
Yeah. Something like that, some kind of financial.
Yeah, or had a gambling problem, but most of the time that's what you see when it's a person that's kind of had a clean record all their life, and then all of a sudden.
Now we're seeing some violent offenses at 50 and above, but I would still say, like, historically, you age out of crime at roughly 30, and so kind of interrupting that life of crime as a teen is critically important to keep someone from being a repeat offender.
Do you think as a society, we've kind of, I guess in a way, violence has always been glorified as far as in the movies and that sort of thing, but then you look at these games that kids play, and they're extremely violent. And then you got to wonder, are they watching this and getting sort of desensitized to it? Or is it?
Such a good question. And there are two very, very separate camps of researchers on this. One camp says, yes, absolutely, and here's the correlation. And there's one set that says, absolutely not.
Right.
And I always find that conversation really interesting. In my brain, anecdotally, I can't imagine that that's not affecting us in some way, because we know that more exposure to something makes you more comfortable with something. It's constant.
Yeah.
But regardless, I mean, you're at least learning how a weapon operates, what it looks like to.
And they can get so involved where you become part of it. It's a lot more than just I'm watching this.
Right, and especially as we move into virtual reality and more immersive type games, I'll be very interested to see the outcome of that and what the research says about that. But I mean, I've had the opportunity to utilize virtual reality, and it really looks and feels like you're holding a weapon, and it's kind of like a bit overwhelming.
That whole reality is just it just makes me think of what is it going to get to the point where it's really going to be hard to determine what's real and what's not.
The metaverse, come on. People say we're going to have houses and all kinds of things in the metaverse. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think technology is ever evolving, and we'll see. I mean, the way social media has completely infiltrated our society.
And really, when you look at it from a time perspective, I mean, what was it? 2010, 2008, 9, that's really kind of when it started.
Yeah, and then it just kind of skyrocketed from there. And then we've added in all kinds of new social medias that are even more inclusive or immersive.
And there's going to be things that don't exist now that.
I think we're seeing that right now with AI. I mean, people are very unsure of AI right now because it's a whole new kind of technology that accelerates much faster than the standard internet did, social media did, because it can learn so much faster than any human can. And so I think people are.
And when you look at that and you bring in the whole teen issue, again, there's something else that they have to deal with.
Yeah, it's living in a world that's so much faster paced than any of the rest of us did, and then expecting them to function without making mistakes because their mistakes are forever recorded, and learning to navigate the whole industries that are focused on manipulating their brain and causing them to be addicted to technology and screens. And it's just something that we didn't have to navigate. So as community members and as adults, we're also having to learn how to help our young people navigate that space, but we're coming from behind. I mean, we have digital natives who are born and can use a phone from the time they're a year and a half years. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you look at kids that they have no idea what an actual landline looks like, or they've never seen a phone booth.
We always say call to report something to tip line, call 713-222-TIPS. And the kids say, TIPS? What is that? They have no idea that there are letters that are associated with numbers on their phone. And that's just a sign of different generation.
It would be, no doubt it would be so much harder to be a teenager, to grow up now, because of all the things
they have to navigate. Just
social media alone would be mind-boggling to me as a kid.
I think so too. And I think, it's affecting adult brains. And so if it's affecting adult brains, it's certainly affecting young brains. And, I think those are all things that have to be considered when we're looking at juvenile programs, juvenile systems, even the juvenile criminal justice system. There's a lot of discussion. There's actually a young adult court in California that has tried to address this. I think there's a lot that can be said about that court, but it's really trying to address the developmental stage of a young person.
Right.
And
well, you walk this real fine line, because there has to be some sort of punishment involved.
Right, of course.
So, well, if nothing happens to me, well, I'm just going to keep doing this. But then you don't want it to come down to be a situation where they end up in the pipeline and they spend the rest of their lives in the criminal justice system.
We do this flip back and forth about life without the possibility of parole for juveniles. Of course, we've eliminated the death penalty for juveniles. But I mean, these are all conversations about what is adequate punishment for someone who doesn't have a fully developed brain and doesn't have all the tools to fully think through that, but yet has caused real harm, inflicted real danger and harm on someone, even taken someone's life. I mean, I can never look at a victim who the offender is a juvenile and tell you that it wasn't.
Bottom line is, it's a problem that everyone, all of us, needs to work on. Hey, thank you so much for watching this, and be kind to yourself and everyone else.